Welcome to part 2 of the novelization comparison between A New Threat, Book 1 of the Unofficial Final Fantasy VII novelization by M.J. Gallagher, and The Mercenary, Book 1 of the Jenova project by Xander Williams. I'm trying to not eat up your whole day this time, we'll see how that goes, so let's get right into it. Today we're covering from the train ride up until the start of the second bombing mission. So both Gallagher's and Williams' work tackle this initial bit of Barrett being pissy, but Gallagher's version has him seemingly especially edgy and unsatisfied with the results of the mission, hinting at his true feelings about it. This is where Gallagher taking his time is especially handy. Also, there's a strange hinting between Jesse and Cloud having a kind of moment here. Wasn't sure what to make of this, but I like it. He slammed the door behind him, shaking it at its hinges. Biggs moved first, trudging slowly along the hold, with Wedge close behind him. Cloud watched as Jesse stepped past him and hauled the shutters together. The sound of the rushing air died away in an instant, laying a veil of what seemed like makeshift silence over the pair. She smiled feebly at him, her freckled cheeks beaming a radiant pink, and scurried away. Cloud paused for a moment, reminded of his puzzling thoughts regarding the bizarre encounter with the flower girl. Snatching his sword from the ground and returning it to the magnet on his back, he began after Barrett. Get a hold of yourself. Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that Jesse is interested in him, but I gotta say, I like the way he kind of hinted that there was maybe some reciprocation there. I like that. Anyways, hate to quote spam here, but I also wanted to call out the next bit where we get a brief history of Midgar. Midgar had been originally built as a town, but, as with every industrial revolution, expanded into what had gradually become the largest city on the planet. However, as the world modernized, so had the city, giving birth to the multi-billion guild company Shinra Incorporated. Primarily established as Shinra Manufacturing Works, the discovery of Mako Energy had granted Shinra an immortal status, swallowing all of their competition and becoming a monopolistic mega-corporation. Their privatization of the armed forces meant that the democratic parliament came to rely on them and, over time, faded into nothing more than a token assembly without influence. We then move on to the group going about the train, including the famous scene between Cloud and Jesse with the monitor. In particular, the convo between Cloud and Barrett almost line for line from the game, about the slums and the plate and what have you, although Gallagher does tone down Barrett's swearing a little bit. As they arrive at the train graveyard, we get our first glimpse of the Sector 7 slums. Now, Gallagher gives us a great description of the slum pillar. I know all my quotes are like from the same 3 pages, but this is where his strength as a writer is. He looked up, allowing his weary eyes to come to rest on the Sector 7 pillar. The enormous granite column stood alone at the center of the sector, a few miles from each of the sector gateways, and had been designed to bear most of the plate's weight above them. A single mechanized skeleton structure grew up along it, stopping about 100 feet from the plate to form a round podium. Bright red and green lights flashed continuously at the height of the steel frame, embedded at the back of his retinas each time he blinked. Beyond the pillar, he could make out the tall gate to the Sector 8 slums, looming over the inhospitable land with its unwelcoming stare. His vision began to blur as he focused on the vast stretches of the city, so he lowered his head and hastened his stride, thinking no more of the surroundings, trailing the dusty road as it wound amongst the filth. I have to, say, that's also some great foreshadowing. I just noticed that, but that really is solid foreshadowing there. I also have to appreciate the nice little Easter egg Gallagher threw in there. As a lover and would-be expert on the soundtrack of Final Fantasy, I appreciate that he references the song on the Juke, Parakyle Town by the Mughals. That's just a good reference. A game mechanic that both the writers touch on here, the flower. Now, in Gallagher's work, Tifa takes it, places it in a vase, and comments on how the bar should be full of them. Nice little character moment with Tifa. We also get to see the gang watching the press release in their hideout, and get another little teaser and our first mention of the relatively minor character of Mayor Domino. Now, this next part here is a huge moment. It is absolutely to me, it is the crux of this chapter. Jessie expresses her doubt about their actions and has a massive crisis of conscience about what they've done, ending so many lives, and even telling us flat out that the explosion that we had wasn't what she was expecting. Now, Biggs, meanwhile, just brushes off the casualties as collateral damage, being the more militant of the two, obviously. And Gallagher doesn't just have this as a nice little character moment, a little moral dilemma, if you will. No, he takes it a step further, and this is where he starts inserting compilation rhetoric. He's talking about Fujito, for instance, and how the bomb plans they got were from Fujito and claimed to be a lot lower yield than they ended up being. To clarify, they got him from his old computer. It's an interesting little connection there between that and, was it before Crisis, I'm guessing? I didn't play the one that much, so, don't know too much about that. Anyways, good moment, and it shows that he's, from the very beginning, gonna start adding compilation details into his work. And I like it. I like the cohesion he brings to that. Now, like I say, all this combined is huge. It's so important. This is the section you really want to focus on in this chapter. And I would quote it, but the thing goes on for about 3 pages, and if I trim anywhere, I would be doing the scene a disservice. I don't want to do that. I can't take like a nice, neat little paragraph and give it to you. Just read the middle of this chapter and take it in yourself. I can't, I don't want to butcher it by giving you only a part of it. Anyways, at the top of page 35, we get a flashback hint. No quote card here because it's very short, but I do like it nonetheless. What did he know? He hadn't been there. He hadn't felt the intensity of the flames, felt the anger of betrayal. Now, it's a small moment, but it's also an interesting parallel to Barrett's own story. He had felt the flames of his old town burning, and would later feel the sting of betrayal from Dine. Solid foreshadowing, man. I love it. Finally, the chapter wraps up with the promise scene. It's done as a flashback, and it's very well written, full of the imagery that I love from Gallagher's work, but it doesn't, compared to at least the earlier section of the chapter, it doesn't really stand out as having anything worth noting. A very nice imagery and characterization, it's just par for the course. Though, to be fair, I was a bit distracted because Barrett calls Cloud Soldier Boy. Again, Gallagher? Anyways, they haggle over the next mission, and that's the chapter. So with Williams' work, if you remember, we're starting out at about halfway through Chapter 3. Now there are a couple of noteworthy things here. Biggs expresses doubt at Cloud's loyalty, again, and now all of a sudden, Cloud is a bit more arrogant and show-offy than he was in the earlier chapters. But truthfully, Williams doesn't spend that much time on the train. He hits all the key points, but he brushes through the section pretty quickly. It's over in about a page and a half. And to be honest, it kind of hits close to home because I usually just skip through this scene on my replays. I'm sorry, guys, I know, but I've seen it so many times. Chapter 4 begins with, mainly, a little vignette between Edward and Johnny, Tifa's friend/stalker. Here's a little bit of that. Margot stumbled by, drunk as a skunk. Old Margot never went to seventh heaven, lush as she was. She was more an alley kind of drinker. Early this morning, Johnny saw her up by the pillar ranting about doctors. Now she was too drunk to talk, and she stopped to slump against a wall. Johnny let out a long drag and watched the cloud of smoke rise up towards the underbelly of the plate. It loomed 50 meters above them, stretching out farther than they could see, blocking out the sky. Hell, Johnny thought, it is our sky. I gotta quote again from this chapter right away because there is a great scene that immediately follows this. It's Tifa hearing the news report before the others have shown up yet, so she's worried sick, and it's just, again, a great unique perspective that Williams gives us from this scene. The news reports repeated the shot every 30 seconds as the broadcast went on. Tifa glanced after every other drink. They showed live footage of wounded victims in trauma blankets, recounting their eyewitness testimonies. Was at work and I heard a noise, and I went out to the street to see what had happened, and Tifa made another cocktail. Husband said we should go back to the car, but then someone had taken the car, and then... She was out of grenadine, she muttered to herself. Still no news of the attackers. Her hand and eyes were occupied, but she kept her ears on the broadcast to see if they had been found. She worried. just such a good little bit of going back and forth. I just like that a lot. Well done, Williams. As the gang finally shows up, we have to pop back in on the flower. In Williams' version, Cloud gives it to Marlene. Clearly, Williams is trying to earn points towards the Barrett date. More of Williams' world-building shows appear in a neat little innocuous scene where Tifa brings up the idea of potion dependency. He really enjoys applying his own rules to the established world, but never in a distracting way. They always seem to make sense and make this world feel that much more visceral and real. It's a good touch. We move into Chapter 5, where Cloud kind of gave up the goat when he stormed out. The bar was full of patrons who saw Cloud leave from a hidden exit, and there's an interesting little, "ah shucks, it's nothing" scene with Nero. So, for this chapter, Cloud is away, and we get little scenes with Biggs, Wedge, Jessie, and Tifa contemplating Avalanche's future. Jessie's big struggle? Wanting to see daylight. It's interesting, it's a powerful message on the status of the people in the slums, but I gotta say, it's not exactly, "holy shit, I'm a mass murderer now." Although he does briefly touch on that. There's another of Williams' twists in that promise scene, and it actually happens out in the train graveyard, with Tifa going after Cloud. Now, it's a relatively minor change, but I like it. It adds a bit of extra zeal in Tifa's pursuit to have her physically going after him. Next up is Chapter 6, Cloud's Reminiscence. Now, Williams does his flashback chapters to clearly denote them. He writes them as so-and-so's reminiscence, and he also switches to first person during these. It's a bit of a strange technique, but it allows him to use the full range of literary voices to tell his story, such as this quote, now observed in first person through Cloud's memory. "I remember Nibelheim, not so clearly anymore. I remember the green of the grass and the brown of the dirt roads, and how tall and thin the Nibel Mountains stretched up, like 1,000 swords pointed at the stars. But I don't know the street names anymore. I don't remember how many houses separated me and Tifa. Everything is shifting and warping. The gingerbread fascia on all the houses blurs and dribbles like wet paint. I remember the water tower, though, this huge thing in the middle of the town square. It had a red-brown trimming, like all the houses, and on Wednesdays it made big slurping noises as it pumped up water from underground. Our parents still called it the well, although I had seen a picture of a well in a book once, and this was nothing at all like it. This was 7 years ago. It must have been early autumn, because I could still leave the house without my coat. I just had my green tunic and breeches. My hair was still long enough to tie at the back. I must have been 14, not yet a man." And finally, Chapter 7 wraps up this segment, actually ending in time, with Barrett and Cloud haggling over the price, and Tifa joining the fray. Nothing much to say here. The chapter's like 2 pages long. So, in conclusion, for this segment, we're starting to see how each author is choosing to spend their plot downtime, with Gallagher focusing on the internal struggles of the character and the history and lore of the world, and slipping in references to the compilation, to include the vast, richer story that awaits us. Williams, meanwhile, doubles down on his own world building, with more original characters and small side stories, which helps set the stage and tone of the work. Again, I think both styles are really good, depending upon what you're looking for. So thank you again for watching this video and spending a small chunk of your day with me. Next time, we will tackle the bombing of the Mako Reactor 5. In case you haven't noticed, I'm letting Gallagher's work set the pace. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Welcome to part 2 of the novelization comparison. Hang on, I didn't check the audio. Let's try that real quick. Oh, it's working. Well, that was pointless. Slowly along the hold with Wedge close behind. That's both a noun and an adjective, Micah. You gotta make sure. Not, verb, you're not even getting your explanation of why you fucked up correctly. That's a good sign. Midgar had been originally built as a town, but, as with every industrial resolution, God, Micah, what the hell are you doing? The gingerbread... I was doing so good on your section, but I had to have a blooper, I guess. I remember the fuck me, it doesn't start with I remember. This quote, this is where you lose it.